All right, welcome back everyone to my round 8 recap from the Qatar Masters. I'm definitely feeling some tournament fatigue. It's been 8 pretty hard-fought games so far, and this game was a super interesting battle. So I do apologize if I slur my words or just appear tired, but yeah, I think the goal is to get through this recap, find some food, and then get some sleep because the round starts earlier tomorrow. But let's hop into the game. I was playing International Master Shyaamnikhil from India. And coming into this game, I was expecting knight f3 on move 1. But my opponent slightly surprised me with pawn to g3, which I can't remember the last time I encountered this move in a serious over-the-board classical game. But the thing about g3 is usually it will transpose into some kind of ready or English or Catalan. So I play d5 here, and after knight f3, knight f6, bishop g2, e6, castle, bishop e7, d3, this is now a King's Indian attack from the white side. And this is one of the main things I was expecting before the game. So I still was in prep. I played pawn to c5. Opponent plays knight to d2. I play knight c6. And someone is messaging me. But sorry, someone. I'll have to get back to you later. So after knight c6, my opponent plays pawn to e4. And this is basically the main position I was preparing before the game. And here there's a lot of different approaches for black. I played what I think is one of the more flexible options is queen to c7. And there are ideas of, in some cases, castling queenside. Basically, I don't want to commit to castling kingside too early. But after rook to e1, I play b6. And here my opponent played what I don't think is a main line. He took on d5. Now, if white plays pawn e5, I would play knight to d7, and this would be a case where black could consider castling queenside, and then enter a middle game where white doesn't really have the traditional King's Indian attack on the king side because my king would be on the queen side. So I was ready to go for positions like that. But after pawn takes pawn, the strategy changes a bit because I take back with knight. My opponent plays knight to e4. And when we got to this position, I was still feeling good because I had this exact position on my computer this morning before the round. And I knew that in my prep file, I had the move bishop to b7. But for some reason during the game, I began thinking and I thought that there's really no difference if I play bishop b7 first or castle first. I knew these moves are basically coming next. So during the game, I made an instinctive decision to castle first. I thought it was maybe slightly more flexible. And after I played this move, I instantly regretted it because my opponent thought for a bit and played the move pawn to c4. And then I realized why I should have played bishop b7 first is white is now trying to exploit this diagonal. And even though there's a lot of things between this bishop and my rook on 8, very soon we're going to see that black is under some serious pressure. Now, after c4, I took my first think of the game, and for a good portion of my my think here, I was just regretting having not played bishop b7 right away. But yeah, I ultimately played knight to f6. And the issue here is white just starts throwing punches. My opponent plays bishop f4, attacking my queen. My queen doesn't really have too many great squares. I play queen to d7. And then my opponent hits me with knight to e5. And for a brief moment, I thought that I might just be losing out of the opening because it just seems like there's a lot of tactics that are going in white's favor. There's now tension between all the knights on the board, and of course, the tension still on the long diagonal. But as I began to calculate here, I gradually realized that black should be okay. And the move I play is knight takes e5. And I want to note here that I was okay with knight takes f6, and even in the event where I lose my rook on a8, I can take on d3. And I'm pretty sure this is totally fine for black. Maybe black is even for choice in this position. So instead of knight takes f6, my opponent played bishop takes e5, and after takes, it still looks pretty scary because my rook's attacked, and these bishops are very much ready to try and exploit my king side. I don't really have too many defenders on the king side, but thankfully here I have the move bishop to b7, just offering the trade of light square bishops. And it turns out that it's not so easy for white to get any sort of quick attack. Now, I do want to note here, there's a funny line. White could consider taking on h7, playing queen h5, and then sacking another bishop. This is maybe a thematic idea in some sorts of positions known as a double bishop sacrifice to then someday checkmate with swinging the rook over. But in this case, it doesn't work because I'm controlling e4 square, so there's no rook e4. And I don't think white even has a draw here because, yeah, in the event of this, I can eventually block queen g4 with bishop g5. So I wasn't scared of bishop takes h7. And instead here, my opponent plays queen to g4, threatening checkmate. And it does look still very scary. And if I play the move f6, I think this would be very bad for black because after takes, white can take the pawn with check and then save the bishop. So after queen g4, I think I had to play g6, no other real option. And then my opponent takes on b7, I take back, and then plays bishop to c3. And now the position has actually simplified pretty substantially over the last few moves. And I kind of breathed a sigh of relief. However, I still had to work very hard in this position as we're going to see, because white has this really annoying dark square bishop piercing through the position. And my pieces are a little bit misplaced here. My bishop is not so happy on e7. My queen and rooks are not on the best squares. So my plan going forward from here, I started with rook f d8, and I really just wanted to neutralize white's bishop with bishop f8 and bishop g7. And then my plan later, going into the middle game, was to target white's backward pawn on d3. But my opponent did not make my life easy, and he started with queen to e2. And at first this looks like a passive retreating move, but he's threatening queen e5. And I had to be really, really careful here, because if I play one careless move, then queen e5, and yeah, I don't think black is surviving this. So after queen e2, I basically had to prevent the idea of queen to e5. I played the move queen to c7. And then my opponent plays queen to f3. So he is being kind of annoying, because now my plan of bishop f8 doesn't work because queen f6. And it's still a question, how do I neutralize white's bishop on c3? So here I started with the move rook to c8, which I thought was a very useful move, preparing queen c6 to offer the queen trade. And I thought here that if I can trade queens, then positioning black should be much better with just better pawn structure, white having the long-term weakness on d3. But it was still hard to neutralize because here my opponent plays pawn h4. And it's very clear that he wants to just storm the h-pawn and create some weakness on my king side. I respond with queen c6, and after queen to e3, he's still threatening to create the queen bishop battery, so I move to d6, and then he plays pawn to h5. And around here, I thought that I'm under serious pressure because white has ideas of taking, and then if I take back with h-pawn, then the queen can come in, and yeah, g7 and h8 are both potential checkmating squares. But in this position, I began to calculate, and I found a nice looking line that ended up happening in the game. And it started with bishop f8, preparing bishop to g7. And here my opponent prevents me from playing bishop g7 by playing h6. It still looks very uncomfortable with this pawn, just kind of a nail in my position. And now it's a question, how do I ever get my bishop to the long diagonal? But it turns out here that I have I think a nice simplifying move is pawn to e5. And after the game, my opponent told me that he had overlooked this move. And the reason why pawn e5 I think is very nice for black is because it essentially offers to trade e pawn for h pawn or e pawn for d pawn. And basically, if he takes with the queen, I'm very happy to trade queens and then take and then just have a better endgame. And then what happened in the game, he took with the bishop, but then I take on d3, and I'm essentially getting the trade of queens. It's hard for white to avoid it. He did try with queen f4, preparing queen f6, but I'm in time to play queen f5. And then very quickly, things just head towards endgame. He takes on f5, I take, and now the h-pawn is more of a weakness than it is a strength. He plays bishop f4, and I play rook to c6. So now it's guaranteed I'll be winning the pawn on h6. And once we got to this position, I was breathing a sigh of relief because I really thought I was under a lot of pressure in the middle game. And going forward from here, I thought I had maybe some chances to play for a win, given that it looks like black is winning a pawn. And after he plays rook d1, we trade rooks, and I do win the pawn on h6. But then he gets some counterplay. He starts with bishop to b8. I play a6, and then he plays pawn to b3. So even though I'm up a pawn here, white's remaining pawns are all very solid. And white's also controlling the d-file, and my rook and bishop are not the most active of pieces. So I found it hard to actually see where, if at all, I have any advantage. And I tried to make some improvements here. I started with king to g7. He plays pawn a4, and I play king to f6. And then he plays rook to d8. So he's getting a lot of active play with his rook and bishop. And maybe there's ideas of rook h8, but he also has ideas of bishop a7 and rook b8 to target the pawn on b6. So here I played bishop to c1, which is a weird looking move at first, but I basically just wanted to get my bishop to a happier square in the center. And after he plays bishop a7, I played bishop to b2, and I actually offered a draw here because I thought what was going to happen is just going to lead to a drawn ending. And rather than playing it out, my opponent actually accepted the draw. So the game did end here very peacefully. And I'll take a moment just to share what I was calculating, and then we'll check with the engine. So I was expecting if he were to play on, he would play rook to b8. I was going to play bishop to e5, attacking the rook, essentially forcing white to win back the pawn. And then I thought that this resulting position is just a pretty clear draw. I was calculating f4, king g6, king f2, king h5, king f3, and then I would wait. And I don't think there's any way for either side to make reasonable progress. So anyway, yeah, I think I'm happy with a draw, but I'm not sure if I was ever better or worse in this game. But let's go ahead and check with the engine. I'll switch to other chapter here. And here we have the moment of truth. Wow. Look at this. Ah, it's so flat, so clean. That's another perfect game. I'm so relieved that I wasn't losing out of the opening. Let's see what Stockfish has to say. So was castling a mistake on my part? So I was supposed to play bishop e7. Castling. I'm actually curious because it doesn't show castling being an inaccuracy here, but I think it's clearly not the best move. But still, after c4, imagine the play was all pretty clean. I was under pressure. But did we just both play perfectly from here? h4 eventually. Yeah, I don't think there's so much more to look at than what I already like analyzed. Yeah, e5 was the best move. I was still slightly worse according to the engine, but yeah, it's basically just heading towards a draw. Let's check the final position. B3. My opponent was getting low on time, but I don't think there was any chance for me to play for a win. Ah, maybe I could have tried F4. My opponent actually told me this after the game. He was scared of F4. But I was in the mindset just to be solid. Engine's still giving equality after King G2. So, okay, can't complain. Yeah, it's actually nice to see that even late in the tournament, I'm still capable of playing a game with no obvious mistakes. So, yeah, after this game, I am now 4 out of 8 on a 50% score. I think I'm gaining a little bit of rating this tournament. Actually, I'm definitely gaining rating because I'm on 50% against all opponents higher rated than me. So there is one more game tomorrow. The game tomorrow starts 2 hours earlier than the previous rounds, so I need to eat and sleep. Thanks everyone for watching. Stay tuned for the final recap, and I'll see you guys soon.